So the objectives that we're trying to fill today is to help all of us understand the basic principles and practices of project management. Now, project management is a huge topic, and there are many books on it. You can get degrees in project management. You can get certifications in project management. It's a big, big deal. So we're just hitting the very high notes today. The second objective is to understand the tools that support a successful project. What do you have to do? What do you need to do? And for all of you to become familiar with control and measurement techniques. We'll talk about project management fundamentals, essentials, the 10 knowledge areas, the 5 process groups. And let's get started. Project management fundamentals. The first thing we have to do is talk about what project management is. And project management is applying knowledge, skills, and tools, as well as techniques, to a group of activities in order to meet the requirements of the project. So it's how do you organize and apply different things to a project so that at the end of time of the project, you've actually been successful and the project is done. This can apply both in construction and non-construction. Project management can apply everywhere. So you have some constraints when you do any project. Your constraints are balancing your project demands within cost, scope, and time. Now, I will also tell you that there is one other constraint here, and it's cost, scope, time, and safety. Because a project is successful when it delivers all of the requirements within cost and schedule and satisfies the customer. But if it hasn't been a safe project, if there's been accidents, if there's been issues in terms of safety, the customer will not be satisfied, therefore the project will not be successful. And I say that because the name of the company is SafeWork. So there you go. What is a project? So a project is a temporary endeavor. It is not a permanent endeavor. It is only temporary. It's undertaken to create a product or service. Temporary means it has a beginning and an end. Unique means that the product or service that is created is different from any other product or service. What are the essentials that you need to have for appropriate project management? Well, there's all kinds of management words here. Integration management, that means integrating into a team. How do you integrate people and items into a project so that they work effectively? Scope management means how do you manage the scope or the size of a job so it doesn't get beyond you. Time management is essentially that. How do you make sure you get done on time? Cost management, making sure it doesn't cost too much. Quality, are you delivering the item that the client wanted in the quality that the client wanted? Human resources management means have you been able to manage the resources of the people on the job so that they get the job done effectively. Communications management is simply that, managing the ability to communicate with all the different variables and the individuals on a project. Risk management. On any project there always is an element of risk. Is that being managed so that you're not undertaking a highly risky endeavor with a very questionable chance of succeeding? Or if there are risky components in your project, have you managed them? Have you talked about them? Do you know alternatives before you get started in the project? Procurement management means you buy, you are managing what you buy and where you buy it. The thing that we're not going to talk about today is stakeholder management, and that means managing your clients. That's a whole, we could devote a whole nother class, if not a whole nother day or a whole bunch of days, to stakeholder management. From the Project Management Book of Knowledge, that's what PMBOK means, there are 5 process groups. And you can see here in their little schematic, you enter a phase, that means you start the project. You're initiating processes, you're initiating planning processes, monitoring and controlling processes, you're executing the process, and you're closing the process. This is the life cycle of a project. You may have to go around that circle several times before you exit to the right. This is a nice little colorful graph that just shows you the life cycle, essentially, of a project. At the initiation of a project, there is a bubble of activity, and then it sort of tapers off until you actually get started in the execution of that project. There is a lesser activity in terms of control, and then there is another bubble in your graph about the activity that takes place at closing. So this is what a typical project would look like. What you're doing in project integration is you're figuring out what processes and activities are needed to identify, define, combine, unify, and coordinate various processes within the 5 groups. And integration is how do you get all the moving parts to coordinate. So to start the project integration management process, first of all, you have to develop a project charter. And that's kind of like, what do we want to accomplish? What are the goals? What are we all here for? Then you get to develop the management plan. Okay, we're all here for X. Now, how do we need to manage it? And you figure out who's going to do what. Then you direct and manage the project work. You also get to monitor and control the project work. And like any project, and I'm sure for the 2 of you, I've never been on a project that didn't have some sort of changes in it. Some of them changed completely in the time that we worked on them. And then you have the all favorite closeout of the project, the end of the project. Project scope management includes the processes required to ensure the project includes everything required and only the work required to complete the project successfully. And you know, project scope management is probably one of the hardest things to do, especially when you're working with clients that have possibly a bigger idea of what they wanted and a smaller budget than what they realize. So scope management becomes very tricky sometimes. We always have to deal with this even as a sub on some of the big projects that we work on, because we always get, well, couldn't your safety oversight people, or couldn't your project manager, or couldn't your resident engineer do all of this extra stuff too? And we have to help our client understand that our scope isn't that big. We're actually in a discussion right now about what our scope was for a project in Sacramento, where the understanding of the client was that we were responsible for traffic control. And we are in a situation where we have to very respectfully explain to our client in Sacramento that no, traffic control was nowhere in our scope of work, that was actually not something that we had been contracted to do by our prime. So sometimes it can be a tricky discussion. So one of the ways that project management deals with scope management is by saying you need to plan scope management out, you need to control it, you need to understand what the requirements are, you need to validate the scope, define the scope, and then create a work breakdown structure that takes that scope and breaks it into parts that can be achievable, again, within what you've agreed to. Project time management is exactly that, time management. It includes the processes required to accomplish a timely completion of a project. And this is also a painful portion of project management because there's so many unknowns in terms of managing an entire project from beginning to end. You know, sometimes when I look at project management, I put it in terms of cooking Thanksgiving dinner. Cooking Thanksgiving dinner is a project. Your outcome is Thanksgiving dinner. You have a scope, you have a budget, you have a schedule, and hopefully you do it safely. Time management, when we look at it from this perspective, is most important because time management means you have to get everything done that you're preparing at about the same time. The turkey can't be ready 4 hours before the mashed potatoes are, for example, or vice versa. So, project time management, if I use the Thanksgiving dinner analogy, is you plan the schedule out, you define the activities, you develop the schedule, you sequence things, you estimate how long it will take to do certain things, you estimate the resources you need, and then, by God, you control that schedule so everybody eats at the same time. Or that the building, or the runway, or the light rail, or the high-speed rail is done when it's supposed to be done, when it was published to be done, when it was agreed upon it will be done. Cost management is exactly that, planning, estimating, budgeting, and controlling costs so it can be completed within the approved budget. And if everything works correctly, everyone has agreed on the cost through the process of estimating the costs so that there are no surprises. I think this is the area that is the most painful. I think that people can deal with schedule delays, they can deal with scope issues, but cost and safety are the two, it seems to me, the most sensitive parts of overall project management because this is dealing with money. So cost management is a critical part of this whole process. Of course, in project cost management, you estimate the cost, you determine the budget, you plan the cost management, and you control the costs. And you better do that at Thanksgiving dinner too, or otherwise you're going to go way over budget and spend a whole lot more money than you wanted to. Now, quality is another important concept here. Quality management includes the process and activities so that you get quality policies, you have quality objectives and responsibilities, so the project will be satisfactory to and will work for what it was undertaken. Everyone has a different definition of what a quality project is. So it's important in the project management process that you define as best you can, you define quality in a measurable way so that at the end of time there is no question about what was agreed to. You plan quality management, you perform quality assurance and quality control. There is a tremendous amount of research done on quality management, quality assurance, and quality control. And as I've said to every webinar I've taught, Google is your friend. There's a tremendous amount of research being done on quality management, quality assurance, and quality control, much more than I could talk about here. Sometimes we forget that one of the most important parts of a project are the human resources that are involved that will actually get it done. So project human resource management includes the processes that organize and manage the project team. Not what they do, but who they are. And the project team are those people who are responsible for completing the project. So again, you plan the human resource management, you acquire a project team, you develop a project team, and you manage that team. What we found in this business is that for most of the work that I do, most of the work that you guys do, we're all technically qualified for it. What my biggest challenge is finding the right mix of personalities that can make a project work well. I have the expression, the projects from hell, and projects from hell are not ones that are technically difficult for us usually. They're ones where the human side of it isn't working as well as it should and needs to be managed better. So, project information is one of the things that needs to be managed very carefully. Information has to go out in a timely manner. It has to be appropriate. You have to be able to collect information, distribute information, store information, retrieve information, and ultimately figure out what to do with all that project information. Especially if you work in the public sector, which requires you to keep tremendous records of every dime that was spent and every step that was taken on projects for a period of 7 to 8 years after the project is completed. Luckily nowadays we have electronic storage. In the olden days, people would have boxes upon boxes upon boxes of information that had to be stored someplace for 7 to 8 years, if not longer, on a project. Again, you plan, you control, and you manage. Risk management includes the processes concerned with conducting risk management planning, doing a risk analysis, essentially, identifying potential risks, monitoring and controlling those risks on a project. And this is not just safety-related risks. This could be any kind of risk. So you plan, you identify risks, you do a qualitative analysis and a quantitative analysis of those risks, and then you control them. Remember that the definition of risk is an uncertain event that could have either a positive or negative effect on a project's objectives. It could either be a threat or an opportunity, but it is an uncertainty. It's something that's not known yet, something that may or may not occur, but you don't know. It is uncertain. You measure project risk. The probability that something can occur is low, very low, moderate, high, very high. That's how you measure it. You have to make sometimes it's a scientific wild-ass guess on the risk. Then you look at the impact if it does occur, and then how to mitigate that risk. The expected value, probability times the impact across many items, it should balance out. It's part of any big project is a whole session on project risk, identifying, analyzing, and putting together plans to mitigate. Procurement management, always a fun part, how you buy stuff. And how you buy the right kind of stuff, either products, services, or results from outside the project team in order to perform the work. So do you know what you have to buy? Do you know what you have to acquire? Do you know what that is? Have you planned for it? Have you contracted for it? Have you gotten responses from the sellers? Have you selected sellers? Have you administered those contracts from the people that you're buying from? And do you have measures in place in order to close those contracts? Like I said, to me, managing a project is like managing a small country for a short period of time. So, at the initiation of a project, you come in, you initiate your processes, you go through planning, you go through executing, and you go through closing on portions of projects and also for the whole project. Some words of wisdom. Know your customer. Do you know, is it clear to you who your customers are? Who are your overt customers and who are your hidden customers? Because sometimes we could say, like, for example, we're doing a project at LA World Airports, and somebody could ask me, who are your customers? And I could say anybody that flies. Well, that's not really the case. Those are the users. Those are the end users. But they're not really my customers. For me, it's very clear. My customers may be two because we work as a sub. My first customer may be the prime that we work for, who we have a contract with. That prime is my customer. And second of all, the second customer could be the person for whom that prime is working. So LA World Airports. So in essence, I have two in my example of working at LA World Airports. It's important that for me, and it's important, I think, for all of us in small business to be very clear about who the customers are. And I think it's also important to understand what the customer's requirements and priorities are, and to always ask our customers to validate or adjust it, or adjust it. What are your requirements? What are your priorities? You ask that question, you get the answer, and then you keep checking. My favorite, we've all heard the expression, don't assume, because assuming makes an ass out of you and me. But in reality, we all assume every day different things. Make sure you keep asking questions. Don't assume that we all know what the customer wants. We have to ask them. We have to be involved in them. We have to continue asking them. For those of us that work in the public sector, our customers can change completely when there's an election, or when there's a new board that's been appointed, or a new head of airport appointed. All of a sudden, in the middle of a project, the requirements and the priorities could shift. So remember to ask. Failing to plan is a plan to fail. So you plan the work and work the plan. So the process is performed to establish the total scope, effort, define and refine the objectives, and develop the course of action required to obtain those objectives. I'll give you my World War II analogy. I would love to see the master project plan for Eisenhower and taking the beaches at Normandy near the end of the war, when the Allies stormed the beaches at Normandy. I would love to see that project plan. What an enormous plan that had to be, with so many movable parts. I'm sure they had a work breakdown structure, the elements that had to define the total work scope, how it was going to work, who reported to who, or what reported to what. And also their responsibility assignment matrix. Who was responsible? Who was accountable? Who had to be consulted? And who had to just be informed about what was going on? So here's an example of a work breakdown structure for Project X. It's a secret project. So you have the project management team, you have the architects and engineering, and you can see what they have to do. Software engineering, hardware engineering, facilities development, and training. All of those are part of the project management work breakdown structure. The deliverables come from the lowest level of each branch. Now, that's great, but who's going to do stuff and who's responsible? That's why a responsibility assignment matrix is really important. And SafeWork, my company, is a growing company, and we're going through some growing pains where people are a little confused about what their responsibility and their level of authority is. So I think in actuality, when I went through these slides before presenting it to you folks, I thought I need to do this internally for my company to realign everybody with who's responsible, in other words, who works on stuff, who's accountable, who needs to be consulted, and who just needs to be informed, and most importantly, who's going to review the quality. So you can see this is how a responsibility assignment matrix works. Monitoring and controlling execution means keeping the project on track. When you're trying to control quality, you need to have indicators that will provide you with information on whether the product is or whether the project is creating a quality product. But you don't want to have too many key indicators, nor do you want to have too few. And I don't know what the magic number is. It depends on the size and scope of the project. You want to conduct performance reviews frequently, whether it's human performance reviews or performance reviews of items in your project. You want to always have a change control process appropriate in case you need to make a change. If there's a design change and different kinds of material need to be ordered and installed, then you want to have a control process for that place that keeps your project still on time, on budget, and safe. So updating project status is critical in terms of best practice. You also want to develop team members in the project, and you do that by meeting one-on-one with them, meeting as a group. You want to also have a system that allows you to drill down to details when you need to, including vendor performance, staff performance, anything that can help you develop a better team is something you keep an eye on as you go through the project management process. Cost control, again, the fun discussion. So you define the work, you schedule the work, and you allocate the budgets. What happens if your schedule goes haywire? Your costs may go up. Then you need to go back to your processes and realize you need to plan your communication with the client, you need to do another risk analysis, and you need to keep the work on track. One of the most fun parts of any project is when you get close to the end. And we're getting close to the end. When you're in the control and execution phase, you want to continue to have reports of how the work is going and the work results. Why? Because you don't want any surprises at the exit. You need to have reports that keep talking to you about scope and scope changes, schedule and schedule changes, costs and cost changes as well, and any corrective actions that you took, any analyses that you did, any plans that you developed. This is as you prepare for exiting or closing the project. Oh boy, we're at the end. Project closeout. So internally, there's all kinds of stuff that a project needs to look at as they're closing. Did we deliver the deliverables? Do we have control over the changes? Are there change orders? What was the dispensation of them? How did they work? How was the work refined? Is the closeout okay? Punch list would be part of this area. The disposition of the physical assets, or where did that laptop go at the end of that project? Disposal of material that may be superfluous, things that you don't need anymore, but how do you dispose of them appropriately? And what sort of historic data do you need to keep? Externally, do you have a written agreement on the deliverables? Is everybody happy with what they got? Do you have certifications for everything that you need to have certified that is working when you turned it over? Have you closed out your supplier commitments? Any facilities that need to be closed? Do you have an appropriate audit trail? Have you done your final invoicing? Is your documentation in place? Project closeout is probably one of the most challenging phases within the whole group of project processes. because it's when you finally are down to the last few details of the job, and you want to make sure that everything is being delivered according to what your client had communicated to you. Now is not the time, of course, for your client to come back and say, you know, I've changed my mind. So then that becomes a client management issue. Although I have been on projects where we've come to the end and they say, well, I thought you were supposed to do something more. Again, issues have to be dealt with effectively to assure continued project success. There are project team and client concerns, technical and interpersonal, that have to be addressed. And also at the end of the project, that may mean you have people coming off that project that don't know where they're going next. So it's important that you manage both the technical and the interpersonal aspects of every project, because the end of one project can be the beginning of another. And that's where we all like to get our business from repeat customers. So what is the criteria? Did you learn anything during this project? What were the lessons learned? Do you have the documentation in place for the project? Do you have a history folder of what happened? In summary, projects need to align with strategic goals of the organization. Rule number 1. If you manage a project through a process group's phased approach, it helps to ensure the success of that project because you've been managing it throughout the time of the project. And if you invest in planning up front, it will pay off in the end and during the entire project, because failing to plan is planning to fail.